In this video, you're going to learn beginner Milky Way photography. And I'm going to shoot with two cameras. My Pro Nikon 610 with an Art Sigma lens and an entry-level Canon M50 with the kit lens that came with it. Hello, my name is Chris Attrell. I have taught night photography to over 6,000 students all across Western Canada. And tonight, I'm going to be shooting at Red Rock Coulee, Alberta. This place looks like outer space. And because it's so far from the city, there's no light pollution. When you shoot Milky Ways, you want to do it on a moonless, cloudless night. And if you live in the northern hemisphere, the best time to shoot the Milky Way is April to September. That's when the galactic core part of the Milky Way is out. That's the part you really want to shoot. When you're shooting the Milky Way in spring, it's in the eastern to southeastern sky. In midsummer, it's in the southern sky. At the end of summer, it's in the southwest part of the sky. And once your eyes have adjusted for the night sky, you should be able to see it with your naked eye. There are, however, apps that will tell you where it's at. PhotoPill seems to be the most popular. I put a link to it in the description below. When I'm shooting the Milky Way, I like to scout my location during the day before I shoot at night. I like to have an interesting foreground subject. Here in Red Rock Coulee, they got about 200 of these massive red boulders that are 4 to 6 feet high. One of these is going to be my foreground subject tonight. So let's go over equipment. All you need is a camera that has manual settings, a lens that can be focused manually, a tripod, and a flashlight. Most of the newer cameras that have come out in the last 5 years can handle the darkness very well. If you're using a camera that's 10 years old, it may struggle when there's no moon, no clouds, and you're far from the city. The widest aperture you can get on a kit lens is an f-stop value of 3.5. That's why a lot of professionals will use a specialty lens. The Sigma Art series can go as wide as an aperture 1.4 or 1.8. These Tokina wide-angle lenses have an aperture value of 2.8. That can mean as much as 4 times more light coming into your camera. I put a link to a whole bunch of lenses in the description below. However, tonight we're going to see how the kit lens does on this entry-level Canon M50. I'm told it does a very reasonable job. Now we're going to go over some camera settings. To shoot the Milky Way, we're going to have to shoot in manual mode. So on your mode dial, switch that to M. Here, we get to set ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. When you're shooting the Milky Way, we're going to have to shoot a really high ISO value. For beginners, I recommend you start at 6,400 ISO. Older cameras may not go that high. Just use the highest numbers your camera will allow. The higher the ISO value, the more likely there is to be a little bit of grain in your images. But newer cameras can handle that grain reasonably good. So to change your ISO, most cameras have an ISO button on it. Press that to change it. For Sonys and Fujis, you're going to have to look for the function button, or FN. Now adjust your ISO. And for Nikons, it's under the menu button, shooting settings, then ISO sensitivity settings. When you're shooting the Milky Way, set it to 6400 and turn auto ISO to off. And don't forget to turn it back on later. On my Nikon 610 with the Art Sigma lens, I can shoot an ISO value of 1600. And one day when you got some experience or upgrade your equipment, you could use a lower ISO value. The next value we're going to change is our aperture. When you're shooting the Milky Way, you want to shoot a really wide aperture because it opens the iris in your camera really wide, letting in the most amount of light. If your lens is wide open, you should be able to get down to an aperture value of at least 3.5. If you have a specialty lens, you can go even wider to 2.8, 2.0, or even 1.8. If you just have a kit lens, change it to 3.5. To change the aperture, some cameras have two command dials. One of the command dials is for aperture. Spin that wheel to change the value. When you spin the wheel, you're going to see a whole bunch of numbers. Those are called f-stops. Get it down to the lowest f-stop value your lens will allow. If your camera only has one command dial, you're going to have to hold the exposure compensation button down and spin your command dial at the same time. Great, now you've got your ISO and aperture set. The next thing we're going to have to change is our shutter speed. To shoot the Milky Way, you want to shoot a really long shutter speed. So for beginners, I recommend you set your camera to 25 seconds. To change your shutter speed, just spin the command dial. When you see 1 inch, that means 1 second. 10 inches is 10 seconds. So you want to spin it to 25 inches to get 25 seconds. Because this Canon M50 has a touchscreen, changing the values are rather simple, especially for night photography. When you shoot 25 seconds, it is possible that you're going to see a little bit of motion in your stars. Those are called star trails. There's a thing called the 500 rule. I put a link to it in the description below. There's a mathematical formula for figuring out how many seconds your camera and lens can shoot before you'll see star trails. However, as a beginner, it's okay to have a modest amount of star trails your first time, because you may have to upgrade your lens or increase your ISO to shoot 20 or 15-second exposures. And my preference is to shoot the Milky Way with a 13-second exposure at 1600 ISO, but my aperture value is at 1.4. That's why really expensive lenses can make a difference. Next, let's talk about focusing. Because you can't autofocus in the middle of the night, you're going to have to focus manually. I did make a 10-minute video teaching you 3 different methods for manually focusing in the dark. You should see a link to it above me now. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to tell you what I usually do in remote areas when I want to manually focus on the Milky Way. First, we're going to have to put our lens to manual focus. There's usually a switch right on the lens. This Canon M50, there's a button on the directional pad for manual focus. Once you're in manual focus, you can just play with the focus ring now and things will go in and out of focus. When your camera is on a stable tripod in the middle of the night, manually focusing is really easy when you can find a distant light source from you 35 feet or further. Tonight, I'm going to be manually focusing on some lights that are about 10 to 15 kilometers away from me. To make it easier, let's turn on live view. That's so you can see on the back of your camera. Some cameras, it's on by default. If you have a Canon camera, you may have to press the button with the red dot beside it. Once you press that button, live view should activate. And for Nikons, there's a button or a lever that says LV. Just press that and you'll be in live view. Now you can already see, focusing will be a lot easier this way, but it gets even easier. On the back of your camera, there's a magnification button. This will magnify your screen up to 10 times. Once you've magnified your screen up to 10 times, and then play with your focus ring, you can be able to focus on stuff 30 kilometers away or further. Then once you focus on a distant light source, just pick up your tripod and aim it towards the Milky Way, because you're in infinity focus. So now your camera is all set up. If you take a picture and it still seems to be too dark, increase your ISO values if you can. Let's see what it looks like with my Pro camera with the Art Sigma lens. Oh, that looks just great. Let's see what the settings look like with the Canon M50 and the kit lens. It did seem to be a little dark, so let's increase the ISO value to 10,000. That seems to have done the trick. This Canon M50 with the kit lens did shoot the Milky Way. So in summary, you're going to set your ISO to 6400, you're going to use an aperture of 3.5 or wider, and you're going to take 25-second exposures. Once you have experience or more expensive equipment, you'll want to set your ISO to 1600, take a 15 or 13-second exposure with an aperture value of 2.8 or 2.0. And here is a tip from my wife. When you shoot in remote locations, keep in mind it may be very difficult to find a gas station that's open after 10. Make sure you've got gas, water, and food. And if you're on Instagram, please tag me if you post a picture. I would love to see it. And if you have a question, a comment, or a suggestion, leave it in the comment section below and I will respond. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.